It's a very difficult area actually, because how broad a brush do we want to paint here? I thought actually I'd just very quickly give an idea as to why the BBC might be interested in the cloud. Things like infrastructure as a service are quite important for us. If we look at most of what we do, of course, it's all about content, and standard definition content is about 33 megabytes per second. HD is about 187 megabytes per second. That means we're looking at, for HD content, about 675 gigabytes per hour for a program. If we just take drama alone, drama produces about 470 hours of programming a year, so that's about 317 terabytes of storage just for drama. But there's a shooting ratio of 5 to 1. 5 hours of content is shot for 1 hour that ends up going out. So actually, in order to be able to manage that, that's 1.5 petabytes just for drama. And again, when you're looking at that, we've got comedy, factual, news, children's, religion, sport on top of all that. It's a big area, and increasingly also in the compute space. Things like transcode, so people want to be able to watch programming on the device that suits them, and we've got to make sure we've got the content in the right media format for that, and that requires a lot of compute power. So we're particularly interested in what the cloud might be able to provide for us as we go forward. At the bottom of this, though, is an organisation that has staff members that need to be able to come in and have the technology to do their job the same as everyone else. And when the pips on Radio 4 don't work, we turn it off and we turn it on again, and then they work again. It's exactly the same as every other IT system in that respect. I'm sure you've all seen this one before. Andrew Tannenbaum, nice thing about standards is that you have so many to choose from. Actually, Andrew has an interesting backstory in that his name suggests that he's German, but actually his parental grandfather was born in Rostov in the Ukraine, though at the time that was in Poland, but under the Austro-Hungarian management, if you like. But he spent most of his life living in the Netherlands, though he was actually born in America. So he's got a lot of influences on his life, and ultimately he had to choose what does he think he is. And for him, actually, he sees himself as an American. That's kind of what he associates himself with. And I think that's something I just want to kind of touch on a little bit later on as to why that's going to be important. The other thing about this is that there are a number of different ways that things are phrased, worded, named in the cloud space. So what I can give here is the BBC's perception, what we've seen, what we've found, and what we're finding, but there isn't necessarily a definitive here, and everybody's going to have to find their own ground. I'm not sure that changing one word allows me to necessarily use this as my quote. There are terms that we know and love, and just to make sure we're all on the same page, we have infrastructure as a service, which is really around things like storage, compute, platform as a service as you go up the stack, lots of development, test environments, middleware, enterprise service bus, that kind of thing. There was a phrase we don't see now used very often, but just for completeness, software infrastructure as a service was a layer that was perceived to be kind of cloud management and development services, but realistically most of those seem to be now flowing into either platform as a service or software as a service. And then at the top, the software as a service itself, which could be anything really. It could CRM, collaboration, document management are key examples of it, but it's whatever people develop. What's interesting about the vendor capital investment is the amount of heavy lifting that has to go on in order to provide that service. Infrastructure as a service requires data centers, energy, tin, in order to be able to provide it. So it has a high capital cost of implementation. What that means is, in terms of the vendor market, you're going to see smaller vendors, not smaller, but a fewer number of vendors in that part of the market. Less competition, therefore, because actually it requires a lot of capital investment to be able to provide those services. As you go up the stack, though, software as a service is something that you can expect to see a huge amount of diversity in. You can expect to see a number of vendors, perhaps large cottage industries, and a lot of vertical markets as well. But the other thing to consider about this is the element of nesting. So a platform as a service that you might be able to go out and buy may actually be relying on infrastructure as a service underneath it, but could be coming from another vendor. And when you go up the stack further, software as a service that you buy could be doing the same thing. Now, you then have a service level agreement for software as a service that may have an underpinning operational level agreement or a platform as a service and another overlay under that on infrastructure as a service. How confident can you be that the provider, that may be a small provider providing that software as a service, understands the implications of those layered service levels, so that you know actually they are able to provide the availability that they're claiming. Private versus public cloud, random building, might as well use it while we've still got it. Again, I think an area that most people are familiar with. Private cloud is all about the notions of cloud services. It is on demand, and it is something that's kind of built on use, but it's dedicated infrastructure for you. It doesn't have to be on your own premise. It can be off premise, but the main thing about it is it's in a kind of safe harbor, if you like, and so it's actually a lower risk investment. But what you will find is it will require more investment for you than a public cloud alternative. But standards, I think, is where things start to get really tricky. You remember that comment from earlier on? It's absolutely applicable here. And so if you look at some of the key facets of the standards, they're not particularly mature at the moment. In the security space, actually, I'd say that's where there are a lot of good standards for ensuring that identity and access management can be in place as long as the vendors are compliant with that. But once you start going to workloads where you're wanting to move perhaps compute or burst from one service to one vendor to another, actually it gets a little bit harder to feel confident that that's working. The standards are kind of there, but they tend to work within a vendor rather than necessarily across vendors. Interfaces, again, is another particularly difficult area, and it tends to be in development. So what we're running in the BBC at the moment is a hybrid proof of concept on cloud, so that we can start to understand which of these interfaces actually that we're seeing between the different layers of the cloud logical stack actually seem to be working, and which one suggests that right now, to be safe, you want to be buying into perhaps a vendor stack for the time being as opposed to going it alone. And data, you'd think, would be an easy thing to move between different vendors. It'd be quite portable, but once you start applying metadata to that, it gets much harder. So if you have got other data associated with the files that you're intending to move, that may or may not be able to move easily between different vendors if you decide that at a later point you need to be able to do that. And I'll be coming to why that might be important. And licensing is down as red because I think it's one of those areas where there isn't really anything much to go on. The question might be, you've invested in a lot of licenses perhaps for on-premise services that you're running now, and you're considering moving one of those services into the cloud. Is there anything you can do about that investment that you've made in your Oracle or your Red Hat or your Microsoft licenses to reduce the overhead of moving into the cloud, or is that just wasted investment? There are point solutions with certain license vendors and certain cloud vendors where actually you can do that. What there isn't at the moment are any standards that give you that feeling of security. So the thing to think about is, if you're about to invest in a refresh of an on-premise system at the moment, and it's going to involve a major license purchase, do think about whether or not this is a service that could be moved into the cloud later on. Think about whether you want to be talking to the vendor before you sign, about whether the license vendors, to whether or not they have any ability to be able to trade in on these in order to reduce the uplift into a cloud service later on. We did some work towards the end of last year in the BBC where we were looking at license standards out there, and we came across 17 or 18 different standards at that particular point in time, but it's constantly growing. The one thing that we see is that the vendors and the services they're offering are moving faster than the standards bodies that are trying to create those standards. What that often means is that you're seeing vendors putting their own standards out there, a vendor-specific standard, in order to get ratification to be an open standard. That's no bad thing in its own right, but it does mean, again, you just need to be sure about if you are buying into a vendor standard, and I think things like vCloud are widely adopted, but it's still ultimately VMware specific at the moment. Just think about what are the open standards that are coming about in this space, and trying to work out whether or not you want to back that course now. Might absolutely be the right thing to do, but it's just, again, a matter of just check. There are a number of cloud standards bodies out there. That information is publicly available, but they are behind the times, and I think they will continue to be behind the times, so it's going to be a challenge for us going forward. And I'll be coming on to some ways some things that might help with that in future. You may therefore need to decide between reliable integration and portability of service. So it could be that what you're interested in is just feeling that I'm quite happy to buy into this cloud vendor, or perhaps a set of cloud vendors. I'm not particularly worried about whether or not I could move that service out and put it somewhere else at a later point. And and I just want that reliability. It's going to be a trade-off, and it will depend on a case-by-case basis as to which one you think is going to work for you. So how might that pain be eased? Well, let's look at where some of the pains are coming from to start with. Some of the challenges to adoption, as I mentioned, those standards are quite embryonic at the moment, so the portability of services is quite complicated. Cloud services can be quite isolated. You can buy software as a service, it's hosted out there on the internet somewhere, but it's kind of ring-fenced. You've kind of made a trade-off already to say that we're happy to buy that service as it stands rather than necessarily have something that's bespoke. But what about if you need to be able to interface that with an existing service that you've got locally, perhaps SAP or some other kind of enterprise application? Diverse contracts, this I think is a pain point for a lot of organisations. Traditionally, technology parts of the business are not particularly brilliant at managing contracts and services. And the one thing we're doing here is adding more contracts and services. Each of those cloud vendors, in theory, is another contract. It's another set of SLAs to manage. It's another set of invoicing to be able to manage. And are we really ready for that? And finally, there is information legislation. So we will be subject to the Data Protection Act, for example. Are you clear where that information is sitting when you're talking to a cloud vendor? Is it going outside of the EU? Does that matter to you given the information that you're intending to store? Is it something you determine that you need to keep locally within your own net data centers for a given period? Again, you need to be it's not always transparent where that information is going to be, and not just where that information is stored, but actually if it's being moved at some point between data centers that the cloud operator is providing. Now there is some assistance in this to help out, and these are brokers that we've started to see coming out, and they really seem to fall into three categories. You've got your cloud aggregator, cloud customizer, and cloud integrator. Right now I'd say the balance of those brokers being available doesn't necessarily balance off all the pain that we're going through as part of this transition, but they will absolutely help. So I thought I'd touch on how we see those different brokers. First of all, the chap down the bottom there without a face, like a bad Doctor Who program or something, he's your end user in the business, he's the person that's going to be consuming your services. This little logo down the bottom left there just represents where we see that there's a contract or a billing, some kind of commercial mechanism that needs to be in place. You obviously have an internal service catalogue, which is where you're providing services into your business, and increasingly, of course, that will be expected to be on-demand services that are provided in a cloud-like way. So traditionally, what you may have are a number of cloud vendors over a period of time that are providing services to you. Some of them infrastructure, some of them software, some of them platform perhaps, and you're managing each of those individually as contracts. But we do know, as I mentioned earlier, that you've made a trade-off, that you're buying those services as is. They're not customized to you, they're not meeting your workflows. You might have to change your workflow to meet that application that's currently available. So what the customizer does is to build upon an existing cloud service. So that might be, and a typical example might be something like Salesforce. You might use a customization of that in order to ensure that it matches your own CRM type capabilities. The risk there is that you're kind of locking yourself further into that cloud vendor because obviously you've invested further in that particular contract. And the likelihood is you're probably now managing the contract for the customizer as well as the contract for the cloud vendor. That might not necessarily always be the case, but that's how we see it's likely to be. If we're looking at the integrator, now this one's interesting because what the integrator does is to bridge the gap between a cloud service, another cloud service, and maybe your own on-premise services that you're running at the moment. So if you've got a workflow that perhaps needs to span one or more cloud service providers, or maybe it's one that goes in and out of your organization, it's run on your own on-premise infrastructure, then it gets passed off to a cloud provider who's running some particular service on that, and then it comes back in, you need that integration in place. So the cloud integrators, that particular role, bridges that for you. They provide that heavy lifting, and as you can see, the likelihood is we see that you probably end up being able to rationalize some of your contracts as well. They can probably manage the contract contracts with those cloud vendors, allowing you to reduce the number of contracts that you're managing as you're managing that through the integrator. The other role that this broker might play actually is as a cloud mover. So if you've got a service that you've currently contracted through a cloud provider, and perhaps you're a couple of years down the line, you're expanding, the cloud provider actually doesn't have perhaps the scalability to be able to go where you want to go. Perhaps actually they're feeling that you're locked in and they're looking to increase the operational costs of the service to you. Or alternatively, it could be that you are using these as the niche parts of the software as a service market, and it's going to be competitive and some vendors will go under, and you may need to move your service and the content that's currently stored in that out to another cloud provider. That's going to be difficult to do on your own, and these are the kind of brokers who will be able to do that. You might want to consider having one of these that you have already built up a relationship with in case something goes wrong with an existing cloud vendor, rather than just assuming you'll worry about it at a later point when you want to integrate. And the final role is the aggregator. I think this is particularly interesting because what the cloud aggregator does is to be able to manage a number of cloud service providers on your behalf, as it were. They manage the contracts and you manage the contract with the aggregator. It might be the aggregator is focusing on a given vertical market segment, perhaps media or finance or HR. And therefore what they're doing is bringing together a number of cloud providers that provide complementary services to you, and they offer them to you as a member of that marketplace. Could be hugely valuable, both in terms of reducing the contractual overhead, but they may also be able to work as by adding value, like providing regulatory compliance. They can confirm that because this is in the finance sector, that all the vendors working behind that only store information in the EU or in the UK. And the final thing they might do is act as a bit of a broker-dealer, so changing the terms of the contracts so that you can, they might be selling services buying services at a large scale from the cloud vendors and then selling them on to other customers who wouldn't be able to buy at that scale, giving you a better price, but also giving you the terms that work for you that might be different from what was being provided by the cloud vendor at the top. The likelihood is you're going to be using a lot of these, so it's going to get complicated. So building relationships with your customers is going to be really important to make sure that they understand what it is your service you're providing. And that's the key question, I think, for me to ask you, because they're going to go around the back route and provide their own services if you're not providing them to them. Decide what you are. Are you a builder of cloud services? Are you a broker of cloud services? Are you buying cloud services on behalf of your business, or are you just advising your business on how they can buy those services? If you don't know what you're going to be, you won't know how to build the relationships with those brokers, with the cloud sector, or with your own customers within the business. I think this is the key fundamental decision point you need to make. Pretty much out of time, but you will have the slides available to you. This is the final slide anyway, but I think the key things here are make sure the business sees you as an enabler, make sure you define the role that you are, and define parameters within which you can buy cloud services safely through good use of enterprise architecture and data classifications. That's it.